So since we're in the library, surrounded by books, I'll give you a scenario. Teachers come over to China, they have a bachelor's degree, about 2 years of experience and a TEFL. What journey should they go on to do with qualifications to get to a leadership position?
Do they have a PGCE or a teaching? No, okay. So assuming that they've already started working, my advice would be don't rush things. You will need to spend some years in the classroom refining practice, becoming good at what you do, because if you're going to lead other people and instruct other people, you need to know what you're talking about, and therefore you need to develop an understanding of what works, what doesn't in classrooms, so that you can coach and mentor other people. So give it some time. I would then advise looking into doing an IPGCE. So there's a range of different universities that offer either QTS routes or non-QTS routes, depending on whether you want to go back and teach in England or not. You're then starting to look around your current school, your current situation for what we might call heat experiences, which is taking on extra responsibilities that
That's a nice phrase, I like that. Heat experiences.
Heat experiences. So this is seeking an experience that is outside your comfort zone, where you're not immediately aware or obvious of how to solve the particular problem that you are thinking about trying to solve. So rather than sitting around and waiting for people to give you responsibilities, you identify something in your school that you think is not working or could be done better, and you make the approach, because that's how you
write that one down.
Yeah, that's how you make yourself known, and then you start to build up an understanding of your own leadership style, your leadership brand, as it were, and some of the things that you're naturally good at, and some of the things that perhaps you might need to work on as a leader. And there's lots of things that once you start exposing yourself to these experiences, you realise, oh, actually, I'm not as good as that at that as I thought I was, and you start to build up this long-term picture of yourself as a leader. And I think once you've got these experiences to draw on, and these projects that you can use to talk about in your CV and your letters of application, you can then start to look at, well, what's the next job? What's the next progression in my career? Natural progression would be head of department, then assistant head of a secondary school, head of a secondary school, and then you're into kind of the senior teams of the whole school, which would be assistant principals, and then deputy heads, and then obviously head teachers.
And are there minimum qualifications that you need to be considered for those sorts of positions, even if you've got certain experiences?
I would say that once you start looking at heads of schools, so that's head of secondary, head of primary, head of kindergarten, once you start getting to that level, good schools are asking for NPQs, so that might be NPQHs, it might be SQs, which are senior leader, master degrees, so a professional qualification and probably a professional learning qualification once you start getting into those levels.
Oh, brilliant. That'll be super helpful, I'm sure, to many people out there. So another thing our teachers really wanted to know is, what are the biggest challenges you face as a headmaster of a big international school brand in China?
I think context is important. So I don't want to sell challenges if they're going to be everybody's challenges. Before I moved to Nanning, I was the head of a school in Shanghai, and that had a very different set of challenges than Nanning does. I mean, with regards to Shanghai, the biggest challenge is probably competition. Lots of international schools in Shanghai, so competition for students, competition for staff. City outside of the top 2 tiers, so Nanning is a tier 3 city. The clash between global and local priorities are much more exaggerated. And they're much more exaggerated because a large proportion of the people that work in the building, a large proportion of the students and most of the parents don't really have any experience or previous experiences or background in the international education. So one of our biggest challenges is how we actually compare to local education and trying to exemplify the differences between what happens in Harrow Nanning versus what happens in other local schools in Nanning. I mean, accompanied with that is obviously the language barriers. I couldn't do anything without my PA, Kirsty. So shameless plug for how good my PA is. So if you ever meet Kirsty, she's wonderful.
I can attest to that.
Yeah. So that's a challenge in itself. I mean, that's a minor challenge really. But in terms of the kids learning all of these complex subjects, IGCSEs, A-levels, in their second language, it basically means that all teachers have to be ESL or EAL specialists, otherwise the model struggles. And then obviously if you're coming fresh from England or you're coming from a country where the student population is fairly homogenous and there's one language of instruction, you might find it quite challenging that you're dealing with students that can't understand basic instructions and then you're trying to teach them IGCSEs and A-levels. So you wouldn't necessarily have a skill set in ESL delivery, and you would definitely need that here. So that can be a challenge as a leader, trying to make sure that staff have the right skills and tools to actually teach the children that come to these types of schools.
What's your biggest pet peeve that teachers do during interviews?